Hey everyone, I'm Pastor Jay and welcome to Simple Church Online. Whether you missed last Sunday, you're checking us out for the first time, or maybe even watching out of state, we're so glad that you're a part of our community. And we're praying today that as you watch, God would use this to bless your life. Enjoy the message.
Amen. You guys can be seated. Great to worship with you this morning. That song could not be more fitting for what we're talking about today. And listen, if you're new to Simple, we want to welcome you. Listen, we're a real family here who are in love with a real Jesus, and that's what you're going to find. That's just who we are. And so we're glad that you're here. And we're in this series called I Am, and we're looking at the 7 I Am statements that Jesus made, and these are profound statements. Sometimes if you've been in church for very long, you've heard these probably quite a bit. We've talked about how Jesus said, I am the bread of life, I am the light of the world, and you hear these things over and over, and sometimes it kind of gets lost a little bit about the impact that these statements made when Jesus said them. And so we're going back, we're looking at these, we're taking it into context. Who was he talking to, and why were these statements such a big deal when Jesus made them? And we're going to jump a little bit ahead in our story. We're going to go back over the next couple weeks for Easter and all those things. And so we're going to jump to John chapter 15, where Jesus makes a I am statement. And this is called the farewell discourse time. And so Jesus has been in the upper room with the disciples. He knows that he is about to die. He has told Judas, hey, do what you got to do. And so he's starting with what they call the farewell discourse. This is basically saying his last words to his disciples. Hey, here's the important things that you need to focus on. Let me just give you these last few things before I leave. And the statement that we're going to read today is one of those last things that Jesus tells his disciples. And it's found in John 15, chapter 1. And Jesus simply says this, I am the true grapevine, and my Father is the gardener. Okay, so a simple statement, a gardening type statement. We've probably heard that before, or you may have heard it as I'm the true vine. Either way, we hear this statement and it's like, okay, he's talking about, vines and grapes, and okay, great. But there are such huge implications inside what Jesus is saying here. And why is this so crazy for the disciples who heard this? Well, for the Jewish people of this time, there's so much symbolism inside the vine. As a matter of fact, some scholars think that Jesus may have been at the temple with his disciples at this time. And there at the temple would have been the curtain that hung in front of the Holy of Holies, the place that no one could go, this huge purple curtain. And historians tell us, Josephus, who was a Jewish historian, told us that there was a gold grapevine that hung around the curtain, huge grapevine. And wealthy people would bring things to add to the grapevine. They would bring golden leaves or golden grapes or something like that to add to it as a kind of a status of their wealth. And Josephus even records that some of these grapevines or grape clusters were the height of men. So golden clusters that were 5'8" or 6 foot in length. And so this was huge symbolism for the nation of Israel. But why? See, the vine, the vineyard, this whole grapevine thing ran throughout their history. Throughout the Old Testament, the people of God, the Israelites, are referred to as God's vine. And he is the vine dresser or the gardener. Isaiah chapter 5, I want to read just a few verses here. It says this through the prophet Isaiah. Now you people of Jerusalem and Judah, you judge between me and my vineyard. What more could I have done for my vineyard that I have not already done? When I expected sweet grapes, why did my vineyard give me bitter grapes? Now, let me tell you what I will do with my vineyard. I will tear down its hedges and let it be destroyed. I will break down its walls and let the animals trample it. I will make it a wild place where the vines are not pruned and the ground is not hoed. A place overgrown with briars and thorns. I will command the clouds to not drop no rain on it. The nation of Israel is the vineyard of the Lord of heaven's armies. The people of Judah are his pleasant garden. You go to Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 21. But I was the one who planted you, choosing a vine of the purest stock, the very best. How did you grow into this corrupt wild vine? And so throughout the Old Testament, throughout the scrolls and the scriptures that these Jewish people would have read, they are referred to as the vine of God. Basically saying that here we have God who is the vine, and then the Israelites, God's chosen people, were these offshoots of the vine. And so there would have been a ton of symbolism inside of that. So the disciples who heard Jesus say this would have been shocked at what Jesus had to say. Jesus says, let me stop right here. Let me just tell you that I am the true vine, and no one is connected to the vine except through me. That would have been crazy for them to hear, because now Jesus is saying it's not that you people are God's offshoots. It's that there is one branch that's now connected to the vine, and it's me. And the only way for you to be connected to God is through me. So when the disciples heard this would have been a shocking statement to them. And just Jesus declaring his divinity and declaring the new process, the way that things would be after he went to the cross. And so with that in mind, I want to read through verses 1 through 8 in John chapter 15 to get some context for what Jesus had to say. He says, I am the true grapevine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch of mine that doesn't produce fruit, and he prunes the branches that do bear fruit so they will produce even more. You have already been pruned and purified by the message I have given you, talking specifically to the disciples. You've already heard the truth. You know the truth. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. For a branch cannot produce fruit if it is severed from the vine, and you cannot be fruitful unless you remain in me. Yes, I am the vine, and you are the branches. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. Anyone who does not remain in me is thrown away like a useless branch and withers. Such branches are gathered into a pile to be burned. But if you remain in me and my words remain in you, you may ask for anything you want and it will be granted. When you produce much fruit, you are my true disciples. This brings great glory to my Father. And so Jesus uses this illustration that would have been very common to them, this idea of pruning and grafting and vineyards and all these things would have been very, they understood what this was like. They probably walked through some vineyards to get to these places that they were going. But for the implications for us are exactly the same. So Jesus is trying to say to his disciples, listen, I am the vine. I am God the Son, and I am the way to be connected to God the Father. And as we're going to see next week, Jesus makes a huge statement to say, listen, I'm the only way, the only truth, and the only life. So we'll talk about that next week. But he brings up this idea of fruit. And he says, if you're going to be my true disciples, if you're really going to be my followers, then you're going to produce much fruit. Well, that begs the question, then, if that's what our job is that what we're supposed to be doing, then what is fruit? Now, you can go to Galatians, and you can look at the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Okay, that is the fruit that we should be producing. But I think it goes deeper than that. I would say it this way. Fruit is the right orientation or leading of my heart that produces right action with my life. Okay? Fruit is the right orientation or leading of my heart that produces naturally right living in my life, right choices in my life, right doing in my life. And I'm going to be honest with you, this is one of the toughest lessons that I've ever learned and am still learning inside of Christianity. So, what does it mean to bear fruit? Because this is what I struggle with in my life. I am a doer. I will get things done. Let's make it happen. Let's accomplish it. Let's do it. But it's not about that. It's about my heart being attached in the right manner. That was really, really tough for me. You see, you have to understand, fruit bearing is not some test of how spiritual you are. Jesus said in 15:5, listen to this. Yes, I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit. Why? For apart from me, you can do nothing. So we can try and produce all these things because that's what we're supposed to do, but those things should be a byproduct of what our heart is and what it's connected to. Now, this was something, I'm telling you, is really, really difficult for me to get. I was a pastor, okay? I started pastoring when I was 20 years old. It was very easy for me to do things for Jesus. I was really, really good at that. But to be connected in heart with Jesus was really, really difficult for me to learn. The fruit that we produce should be a natural byproduct of what our heart is connected to. What the problem inside of Christianity, and certainly what I found, is that we attach our fruit to how spiritual we are. So this is what it looks like. If I show up to church every Sunday, that's fruit that I've produced. I have self-control. I show up every week. Do I spend any time with Jesus outside of Sunday? No. But I've produced some fruit on my own effort by showing up. Okay? This is the mindset. And again, I'm not saying don't show up to church. Obviously, that would be the dumbest thing for a pastor to say. I'm saying, why do we do that? Why was I a pastor? Well, because that seemed like the most spiritual thing to do when I decided to give my life to Christ. What's the best thing that I can achieve when it comes to being spiritual? Well, a pastor seems like that, so let's just shoot for the stars and we'll just do that. And I got to a place in my life where the people that I looked up to and that my faith was based on, the things that they started saying, the things that they started doing didn't add up to what I saw in Jesus. And I had a crisis of faith. Because all of my life was wrapped up in what those people believed and what I had done for Jesus. In 2016, I went on a spiritual getaway. Sabbatical is what we call it inside ministry. And I went on a sabbatical, and I've shared some of these stories. I camped before, I camped by myself, had never done that before, and just had this time with God. Got into it with some raccoons. I will forever hate those things. They're the spawn of Satan. I believe that the fallen angels went into the raccoons, and that's where they dwell. And anyway, side note, I had this moment with God. And he began to challenge me about what I believed about my faith and about Christianity and about being a Christian. And he, not audibly, but it was just me, and I was literally just in a tent out in the stars, and it was just me and him. And he said, "What are you doing to follow me?" And I said, "Well, I'm a pastor." Jesus. I'm kind of at the pinnacle of what you can be. And he said, "So what?" And I was like, "What do you mean, so what? I've given my life to you." He goes, No, you've given your actions to me. You haven't given your life to me. And it started a journey for me that I'm still on today of learning how to be with Jesus. And if you've never experienced that, and I think that a lot of Christians have not experienced that, I think there's so many people who know Jesus, who know about Jesus, but do not know what it means to abide and remain in Jesus. And if you've never been at that level, then you are truly missing out on what this whole thing is actually about. It's not about the fruit that you produce. It's not about that. It's about what you're connected to that allows you to produce the fruit. That's it. And that's what Jesus was trying to get through to the disciples. Like, yes, you're going to accomplish some things. You're going to go through some persecution. It's going to be tough, but you guys are going to do it because you've been given all the tools, and whatever you ask for in my name is going to be done. All that stuff's great. But you can't do anything without me. Unless you're connected to the vine, you can't do it. Because then it's on your own strength. So what does it mean to abide in Jesus? I used to hear people say this. As a matter of fact, we went to a spiritual formations conference. We hosted one at a church that I was at. And these guys came in and they were doing the spirit, and it was all about abiding. And I thought it was the dumbest thing I've ever been a part of in my life. I kid you not. And I've talked a little bit about this illustration. They said, pretend you're sitting on the beach there, and you're by a river, and the boats are going by. And this was this whole idea of what abiding looked like. And I was like, all I could picture was like party boats. And I was like, hey, what's up? You guys are having fun. Yeah, like that's where my mind goes, because that's just how it works. And so for me, I was like, this abiding thing is just stupid. What are we going to do, just sit here and do nothing? No, let's get up. Let's actually do something for God. We're just going to sit here and talk about our feelings and stuff like that. Let's get up and let's go do something for God. And then I went on this retreat, and God challenged me. And so what does it mean to remain and abide in Jesus? So God gives me really weird illustrations for me to understand things. I don't use them a lot because they're weird for me. And so sometimes I'll share them, sometimes I won't. The way that I picture sin and God removing it is when I trim my goatee. And it just, creates a mess in the sink. And then you just wash it, and it's like it never happened. It's super weird. I told you, right? But that for me is what God, anyway. So this is the weird illustration that while I was camping that God gave me about what it looks to abide in him. I want you to picture that you're skydiving. Okay, how many of you have actual skydived in your life? Wow, just a few. Okay, I figured more people had, okay? It's a few people with death wishes, good job. I had that for a while, and then I was like, I'm good now, I have kids and all that stuff. But picture you're skydiving, you get up to altitude, they open the door, and you jump out, man. You feel this free fall, it feels so good, the wind's on your face, all these things. Then you remember you never put a parachute on, okay? Imagine the fear that would grip you. It's imminent death. You're going to die. There's just no way around it. It's going to be quick, thankfully, but you're going to die. The only hope that you see is that the instructor is just over there, and if you can just make your way over there, maybe you can hold on to him. And so you fly yourself through the air there, and you get a hold of the instructor, and you hold as tight as you can because this is your only life source. That's the picture that I have when I think about abiding in Jesus. It's this, without this, I'm going to die. Without you, I'm going to die. I don't care what I do for you. If I don't have you, if I don't have a relationship with you, I'm going to die. And that to me has been what has gripped me over these past, that was in 16, so what are we, 7 years from that? That my journey to actually just be with Jesus, that's my picture that I have, that I know unless I have him, I'm headed for death. And it's not if I have knowledge about him, not if I just know a little bit more about. If I have Jesus, if I'm connected to him, I have life, I have hope. And without him, I have nothing. And so I hope that maybe that helps a little bit with you. It's clinging to what gives you life. It's not letting go. It's not wavering. And I truly believe there are a lot of people who know Jesus, but very few who abide in Jesus. And let me just challenge you, because it took me a long time to figure this out, that certainly you need to know about Jesus, and you need to know what he did and all those things, but it's more important for you to fall in love with Jesus. And when Matthew and I were talking about this next series that we were going to do, I just said, I just want people to fall in love with Jesus. Like, I missed that for so long. That's what it's really about. It's about falling in love with Jesus. And even as a man, that's weird and that's kind of hard. I'm not saying it's easier for women, but in some instances it is, just to say that I love somebody. It took me a while to get to that point where I could just say, what, I just love Jesus. I love him, and I just want to be with him. That's what abiding is about. And I think there's a lot of people who sit in church but are never actually connected to the vine. And if you've experienced this church thing and it hasn't worked for you, or you have these huge ups and downs when it comes to your faith, maybe it's because you've never actually been connected to the vine. If you've been in this life of where it's just about producing, how much can I do for Jesus, or how much can I get done, and it just feels like this hamster wheel that you're constantly on, maybe you've never actually just been connected to him. And that's the challenge that I want to give you. And in Luke chapter 10, I think that there is this perfect explanation of what it looks like to abide in Jesus. I'm going to be honest with you. For a long time, this story made me mad. Like, I did not like this story or this recollection here. And it's found in verse 38. And so Jesus goes to the home of his friends, Mary and Martha. He's visited them several times. And this is what happens when he comes one time. Luke chapter 10, verse 38. As Jesus and the disciples continued on their way to Jerusalem, they came to a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. Her sister Mary sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he taught. But Martha was distracted by the big dinner she was preparing. She came to Jesus and said, "Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits here while I do all the work?" Sounds like siblings right there. "Tell her to come and help me." But the Lord said to her, "My dear Martha, you are worried and upset over all these details. There's only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken away from her. For someone who does not like to sit around and talk about feelings and this abiding junk and just wants to do things, let's get it accomplished. Let's do bigger events. Let's draw in more people. Let's grow. See how many people we can fit in this building. For me, I hated that story. How are you going to get on Martha? She's working her butt off for you. She's trying as hard as she can to do things. And here's lazy Mary just hanging out, doing nothing. Why don't you tell Mary just to get up, get some stuff accomplished, and then come sit down? If you've ever lived that life on that hamster wheel of like, I got to do more than you, and if you're not doing more, then you're lazy, and I'm better than you. If you've lived that, then this is a frustrating story until you get it. And that song that we sang, man, it pierces my soul now. I just want to sit here at your feet. I couldn't have said that 10, 12 years ago. I could have said it seriously, that I just want to be with Jesus, man. I just want to not know him in like a, hey, let me study more about this. And again, that's super important. We're going to talk about that here in a second. I just want to know him, like what he wants for me and his will for my life and just those things that only he can give me. And if you've never been at that point in your life, man, find that relationship with Jesus. Search after that over everything else. Find that relationship, because that is what's going to set you on the right path for the rest of your life. Because if you don't find that, if that's not the basis for this whole Christianity thing for you, you're going to be constantly trying to either measure up to something, to try to do a little bit more so that you feel a little bit better about yourself, or what you're going to do is you're going to rest on accomplishing a few things for Jesus. You're going to get up to heaven, you're going to say, well, Jesus, I went to church every Sunday for 50 years. He's going to say, I never knew you, though. And that's what's most heartbreaking to me, is that I think that there's so many people that sit in pews and chairs every single week who don't actually get to feel the love that Jesus has for them. And that's for different reasons. You see, Martha wasn't doing anything bad necessarily. She thought she was doing a good thing, and she was. She was preparing dinner for Jesus. That's a pretty good thing to be doing. She missed out on the best thing. And what I've seen in church and why I've seen this happen, and maybe the same is true for you, is that instead of being taught to abide in Jesus, we're taught to avoid hell. And I think that why I've seen so many people not be in love with Jesus is because they're so afraid of Jesus. And there is an awe and there is a reverence for God for sure, but Jesus is also our friend, one who sticks closer than a brother. And if you grew up in that sense of being afraid of the only thing that really keeps you in church is so that you don't go to hell, then you probably have not experienced a real loving relationship with Jesus. You probably have not experienced Jesus in the way that he meant for you to experience him. Now, there's a lot of truth to what Jesus says. He says, if you're not connected to me, that wood is gathered up to be burned. Now, I have some different ideas on hell, and one of these days we'll talk about it. But I think we get so focused on that's why we follow Jesus. You better follow Jesus or you're going to burn. You better follow Jesus or you're going to hell. And if that's the starting point for you and like, hey, maybe I need to look into this because I don't want to go to hell, that's okay. That's fine. But if that's where your whole basis of your salvation and your faith stems from, you're going to spend the rest of your life in fear of God and in fear of who Jesus is and what he brings to your life, which is the exact opposite of why Jesus came to this earth. So how do we abide in Jesus? If that's the most important thing, how do we abide in Jesus? Well, part of it, Jesus tells us in John chapter 15, beginning here of verse 7. He says this, but if you remain in me, abide in me, and my words abide in you. So part of this, part of the way that we abide in Jesus is just to spend time hearing from him and his word. From the moment that you come into church, your kids back there at some level are learning to read their Bible and pray. your 5th and 6th graders in our 56ers room that is happening on Wednesday nights now, and they're doing a killer job back there. They're going to learn at some level to read their Bible and pray. Okay? Our junior high and high school students at the house on Wednesday nights, I promise you, they're going to hear, read your Bible and pray. You come on as an adult, read your Bible and pray. And what happens is we get kind of lost in that. Like, I know I'm supposed to read my Bible and pray. Why? Because it's what a good person does, and it produces fruit. It makes me feel better about myself. And yes, that is a byproduct of reading my Bible and praying. But what it really does, and why that message from when you're born to until you die, you're going to hear that message from the church, or you should be. The reason that you're stating it over and over and over and over and again is because that's what connects you to Jesus. That's what connects you, because you get to hear who he is and what he actually did for you. There's no way anyone can read the Bible and think that God is a mean God. There's no way. You would have to put that in there somehow and decide that for yourself. And so in this world that we live in, that God is so mad at everybody, and Jesus is such a bitter person or whatever, it's because nobody now knows him. And so if you're a Christ follower, you 100% should be reading your Bible and praying. And as a matter of fact, if you don't, I don't think you could be a Christ follower. I'll say it. How can you follow Christ but not connect with him in any way? Showing up on Sunday mornings, that's not enough. This is time to equip and to challenge each other, but your time to get intimate with Jesus, to know and love him, that's your time that you spend with him, reading his word, hearing more about him. That's time that you spend praying and communicating with your Creator. That's how we form these relationships. So how in the world can we call ourselves Christ followers and then not do anything? It doesn't compute. It doesn't add up. And here's the problem. This is where our brain goes to now. Oh, I'm not a good Christian because I don't do certain things. No, that's not what I'm saying. You're back on the hamster wheel. I'm saying Jesus said it himself. The only way to get to God is to remain and abide in Jesus. He doesn't say producing fruit gets you to Jesus, gets you to God. Hear this. This is important to understand. Being in me gets you to God. Fruit is a byproduct of being connected to me. It's a completely different way to look at it. And for some of you, you got to break the cycle of religion. Jesus, these statements that he's making was to break the law. To say, hey, you can't accomplish all these things in and of yourself. Jesus told them in the Sermon on the Mount, be perfect. Anybody accomplish that? Anybody accomplish that after about 9 o'clock this morning? Did you already mess that up, right? So how can we be perfect? That's the point that he was trying to make. You can't. You were never meant to be. It's too big. It's too great of a burden. So as he's making these I am statements to the disciples and the Jewish people of this day, what he's trying to say is, you can't carry this load. It's too much. You can't do enough. You can't be good enough. You can't produce enough fruit. You can't accomplish enough by yourself, and you don't have to. That's why I'm here. I'm taking your place. I'm dying for you. In a couple weeks, we're going to celebrate Easter. Why? Because Jesus did the thing that only he could do for us. Some of you try to put yourself on that cross, and you can't do it. You were never meant to. That was Jesus' place for you. But that's why it's so important for us to be connected to Jesus. I'm so passionate about this because I lived it for so long, and I see it play out over and over and over again in Christ followers. And then they walk away because Jesus wasn't enough. Man, you were not connected then. I'm telling you right now. You were either at church because you were afraid of hell, or because you thought that if you did that, then that would be another notch in your belt. And that's not Christianity. That's not faith. That's not why Jesus came to die. He came to set you free from that. He came to make a declaration. Hey, God loves you enough, and he knows that you can't do it in and of your own. You can't get to him. You can't do enough good stuff. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to take care of all of it. And all you need to do is know me, love me, and hear more from me about who you are and what I've created you to be. That is such a different Christianity. And if our world would begin to grasp a hold of that and not the Christianity that said, do this, don't do that, we would see life change happen. But there's a fear. Well, if you don't preach against sin only, then people are going to sin. Guess what? Preach against sin all the time, and people still sin. Preaching is not the fix as much as I would love for it to be. Jesus is the fix. Falling in love with Jesus is the fix. Having a more intimate relationship with Jesus is the fix. Hearing more from His Word, communicating with Him through prayer is the fix. That's the change that needs to happen in the church. And it's happening. I'm telling you, it is happening. There is a, revolution's kind of a weird word now because the Jesus Revolution just came out, which I've had the chance to see that a couple times. I would say go see it. I think that they did a really good job. But I think that there is some kind of a revolution happening where people are saying, I think we came out of COVID and people are like, okay, if I'm getting back into church, then I don't want the same old thing. Like I want a family and I want truth. I want the true truth because there's a lot in this world that is screaming at me. And there's a line in Jesus Revolution that the pastor's wife says, which is so fitting. It's just like, because the pastor's like, there's so much noise. It's so loud. There's so many different voices. And she's like, well, God's voice is always quiet. And he said, yeah, but it's complicated. And she says, the truth is simple. And I was like, yeah, name your church that. That's fair. Yeah. I was like, yeah. I did like a silent clap, like I was looking at my kids when I was like, we did it. And they're like, okay, Dad. But I loved the point of that. In this world of chaos, the truth is simple. And the truth is Jesus. And I just, with all of my heart, I want each and every Christ follower to just fall in love with Jesus. Because it changes everything. It changes the entire way that you live life. And because of that, out of that will come this bearing fruit. Out of that will come all these things. That's where it comes from. Not because the preacher tells you not to do something or to do something. It's when you finally become connected with Jesus. And for those of you who have done that, who understand that, you know what I'm talking about. You know the difference that I'm talking about. When you're truly just connected with Jesus in a loving relationship, it changes everything about how you conduct yourself and how you live life. And that's why Jesus said, just abide in me. Abide in me. Without me, you can do nothing, but in me, you can do all kinds of things. Now, I have to stop there because Matthew finished early last week and kind of, made it to where if I go long, then I'm the bad guy. So, no, I'm just kidding. I hope and I pray that at some level, in some way, that you can find that. You want to change your marriage, you want to change the way you parent, you want to change the way that your circumstances are in life, change the way that you interact with Jesus if you don't have that kind of relationship with Him. Because here's the truth, your circumstances are not going to change sometimes. We live in a fallen, broken world. Your circumstances may stay exactly the same. When you're connected to Jesus, that's when you produce fruit. What is fruit? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. You can chase after money, and it's never going to make you happy. You chase after those things through Jesus, you're going to find real, true joy in life. Those are the happiest people because it doesn't matter about their circumstances. It doesn't matter what they're going through. They are connected to the vine, and that's all that they need. I just want you and nothing else. If you can get to that place, I'm telling you, life's going to be a whole lot easier because His burden is light. That's what He wants for you. And I hope that you're in my heart. That's what I want for every single person. When I preach tough, when I preach hard, it's because that's what I want for you. I want you to have that relationship with Jesus. So I want to pray for that right now.
Once again, thank you for stopping by today. We'd love for you to be a part of our family at one of our services at 9 or 11 on Sunday. You can find out all of our information at simplechurchtulsa.com, and we'd love to pray for you any way we can, so please message us, and we hope you have a great week.